maybe.
Very exciting.
Very exciting. Well, always exciting. Always exciting. The dad joke segue part of my brain is going to be like, not as exciting as the tasting tonight. Dear.
I'm all for dad jokes now that I'm a dad. Very strong believer.
We've lost
Welcome everyone to tonight's virtual tasting. Oh god damn it. Lovely Australian Wi-Fi, internet, all that. Welcome. We're good now. There are some absolutely stellar drams in tonight's lineup, with some super old whiskies around 30 years, and I think it's one of the rarest tastings we've done. I think all the bottles together come to like a whopping $5,400. So yeah, quite a spenny lineup, which we're excited to share with you tonight. And I believe this officially marks the last Whisky Sponge tasting we're hosting at the Whisky List. Though they'll definitely make an appearance in future tastings. We've hung on to a bottle, if we've like hung on to a bottle of something, or there are still some sponges to come. There's some last little dregs, but we are officially saying goodbye to the Sponge series and the new Whiskyland series with this one. And we are joined by Angus MacRaild as usual tonight. We always appreciate him popping in on his busy mornings to join us, and a really great chance for us to learn all about the newest decadent drinks ranges that the brand will be moving towards. So general housekeeping before we get underway and I hand it over, we recommend having 6 glasses so you can go back and compare each dram if you have the glassware for it. As usual, please don't drive afterwards. I think all cask strength except for the Jura, which is probably natural cask strength, but ironically low. Yeah. But yes, responsible drinking is always encouraged. All of our tastings are recorded as well for those who want to watch them back, or those who can't join us tonight. Those will be up on our YouTube channel, so like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And please pop tasting notes and questions in the chat. We will try and get as many answers for them as possible. But that's enough yapping from me. I know we're all keen to dive into the whiskies. So I think we are going to start off with the second oldest, the Jura 30-year-old, and I'll let Angus tell us a little bit about this one. This is part of like a mini island series that you did.
Yeah, so this is one of very few occasions where the labels drove the product selection element, because I had this all started off because my artist Kat, who does other stuff as well as ours, did some artworks of maps of different places, bits of Scotland and stuff, and she did it in this style, this sort of watercolor style, and I just loved it. So we have to do that for Islay and Jura, and that was the thought. That's the obvious comparison here, Islay and Jura. I thought, right, I need to find an Islay and a Jura that would be suitable for this, and I developed the concept a bit further, thinking, right, could we find an Islay and a Jura that were both not PT examples and had both also spent the entirety of their lives maturing on the respective islands, and sort of strengthen the concept of celebrating the 2 whiskey islands and looking at them in a kind of, slightly more like unvarnished, unpeat, obfuscated light. And so it took ages. I thought we were never going to be able to do it because we did the labels, did the artworks, and they were prepared and ready. And it just took me about a year and a half to find anything. And we just managed to get them in just in time in the last 5 sponges of the series. So this is the Jura of the 2. And it's a refill hogshead, 1994, matured its entire life at the distillery. We literally just got it out the week before we bottled. And I was really I was very happy to find this, because we had the Bruichladdich already, but this is the missing piece of the puzzle, was the Jura. And the natural strength was down at 46%. So it's 46% ABV, but that's bang on natural cask strength. And I just was really happy with the result. To me, Jura is a distillate which has a lot of character, but on one hand, it's either can be a bit weird and austere when it's young, or it can be something that's bludgeoned into total oblivion by the sort of wood policy of the owners, in that they'll just smother it in active oak, caramel, whatever. I'm always been a champion of Jura. I've always really loved Jura because it's a West Coast whiskey, it's an island whiskey. The fact that it comes from Jura, if you've ever been there, it's such an experience to get out there, to be there. It's profoundly romantic, it's very historic, it's extremely um, characterful as an island. And you see all these islands on the west coast of Scotland are really unique places, unique geography, unique people, unique history, unique culture. And the distilleries in these locations, I think, often tend to possess a level of character which is pretty special and pretty idiosyncratic still. It's also why we did a series called Whisky Sponge, for example, to celebrate the West Highlands and those whiskies from that part of Scotland. So yeah, this was to me a good example of Jura when it's at its best, which is when Jura gets a bit of age behind it in just a plain simple cask. It can really start to develop well. The distillate starts to show well. To me, this is a whiskey which is more gentle on the nose. It's quite subtle. It's soft. You get the sense that it's got a nice amount of like freshness. The wood has not been aggressive. There's still a lot of distillate there. You get sometimes with Jura, I get this kind of funny combination of waxiness and this kind of like savory, almost lactic character, and an oiliness, like a sort of groundnut oil or a cooking oil vibe. And that kind of slightly mechanical, slightly waxy characteristic is in there. But to me, this is a whiskey all about the palate. Is when you get to the palate, then it really sort of takes off. And I think there's a wonderful fruit character that comes in. And I think that combination of this oilier, more mechanical, waxy, but also coastal, that's where the coastal character comes in. And you feel that this is more of a charismatic, fresh, mature island malt whiskey. And the fact that it's 46% makes it extremely drinkable. When whiskies arrive at naturally low cask strength over quite a significant period of time, 30 years, I think that's when you really start to get this perfect fusion of character and flavor, but also the alcohol is so sort of absorbed into that profile that you don't feel any burn at all. It just becomes this extremely drinkable, easy, and sort of pleasurable, cohesive single experience. I wouldn't add water to this. You could probably maybe add 1 or 2 drops potentially, but just to sort of sip and enjoy. It's really I drink this one at home for pleasure. I've got lots of sponge bottles open here at home, and some of them they're here that I return to them occasionally just to sort of see how they're doing and test them and think about how I feel about them. But this is one of the ones that I will just pour a decent sized dram of an evening if I just want to sit and have a dram, because it's just so simple and easy and direct, and like I love the flavor. I love the pure character of it. So it'd be interesting to compare this to the Bruichladdich later on if you are able to keep a few drops in the glass, because the Bruichladdich got a lot of similar positive things to say about it, but it's quite different. But yeah, interested to see what you all think about this. We've done this a couple of times now because at the Edinburgh Fringe we had a little tasting where we did just these two, this and the Bruichladdich head to head, and it was really split down the middle as to what people preferred, which is always good. That's what to me is a good sign that this. That's what I like for our bottlings, is that they are good kindlers of conversation and good kind of dividers of opinion.
Yeah, for sure. It's I completely agree with what you say, that Jura with a bit of age on it. Been one of those things for me. I pretty much, unless a Jura is over 20 years old, I'm like ambivalent. I'm not particularly interested in trying it. I think, yeah, it's got this really incredible quality. It's like a cheese board whiskey. It's the kind of whiskey you'd have with a cheese board. It's got that like brie cheese soft funk to it, but it's a little bit floral, a little bit fruity, like kiwi fruit kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Michael says there's a freshness about it, sunny beach vibes, tropical fruits, toasted pineapple. Chris is getting the dankness. Yeah, getting a bit of both, but yeah, it's so lovely to find a lovely Jura. I've tried a lot of not so lovely Juras in my career.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I've
so
got a sort of subliminal, or like a little, like one of our missions as a company. I suppose it's lower down the priority list, but one of the missions is to every so often bottle Juras which are good quality, excellent examples of Jura, and prove to everyone that no, Jura is actually a good whiskey.
Yeah, I I feel like it's a they're not necessarily as big a company under White and Mackay, but I feel like Jura is definitely one of those big company treatments where it's sort of like, yeah, just pump out what people are used to. And it's like, but the pretty stuff, why would you leave the pretty stuff?
Well, it's the biggest selling malt in the UK, I think.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
mean, it's Jura is like supermarket juice here in the UK. It dominates the kind of supermarket sales, and it's always on, like £25 a bottle for a Jura 10-year-old or Jura, one of the NAS ones or whatever you can find in the supermarket. And these are not bad whiskies, and that's another like really good example of that's probably my favorite Jura that we've bottled, edition 46. Um, that was this sort of multi-vintage combination of a 91 and a 94. Um, I'd love to do these two side by side one day. Actually, I don't have any of 46 open anymore. I need to open one. It was really, really good whiskey. And that's also one, because it was one where we made a lot of like conscious decision to combine these two casks. It's really a good proof of concept about this whole small batch multi-vintage approach that we take on occasion. Um, yeah, I love all the Jura bottlings we've done. I think uh, we've done a good job with Jura over the years. And
I,
when people try these things, they forget that it's got every bit as much character and like oiliness and texture and body as a whiskey that similar vintages of Clynelish have, for example.
Emma and I cracked that edition 46 at a whiskey festival last year, the year before, I can't remember now. Australians, we have a negative connotation towards Jura. The OBs ones we get is very basic, and then we've tested it a few times. It just doesn't work, and not every IB Jura, they're okay. Like that, there's nothing to sing to that we've ever had that's rock people's world. So we gave this blind to try for a few people, and not only was it the favorite whiskey or one of the top three of the entire festival, even though it wasn't unofficially there, like you couldn't buy it, you couldn't try it. It was just if Emma gave you a dram. But then people, were
It was very
emailing, were
liberal though.
begging us for more. They loved the label. It just became the discussion, and people just it just changed mindsets. And that to me was such a pivotal moment for the Whisky Sponge brand in Australia, where we're like, trust Angus when he puts something out. It's not going to be shit. It's going to be good, and we need to try it. We need to have this conversation. This is why we do these virtual tastings. So don't say a distillery is okay or not okay, whatever the reasons is. If you don't like Jura, that's fine, but try the IBs because there's a reason you bottled it, and that was kind of the point I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I think this was an important bottling for us in many ways, because it was one that I still get comments about like this. It still comes up in conversation, and it was one that got a lot of positive feedback at the time. It was very universally well reviewed, and I think because it caught that little wave that bottlings occasionally tap into of, oh, this really defies popular expectations about a certain make or certain distillery. And uh, that's part of the like foundational pleasure of doing indie bottling, is that you can do that. And I still think it's true, not just of Jura, although Jura is probably one of the top examples of this, that if you want distillery character in this day and age, go to the indies, not the distilleries. Like the indie bottlers are the ones that put out the most pure, unvarnished examples of distillate personality in bottle. I mean, our Bowmore 2004 we just did for Whiskyland is another really good example. Like Bowmore is better represented by the indies than the distillery in my view. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, which we get into, but the indies at least have the freedom to do that if they can find the casks. That's another story. But yeah, so Highland Park, another example. Most distilleries, you could argue, I think it's just because really indie bottlers tend to be people that prefer that anyway. And when they find good casks, for whatever reason, they've been released into the wild by the distillers. They tend to have fallen through those cracks of distilleries making very large batch bottlings or undertaking very intrusive sort of activity with casks that alter the fundamental character of the spirit. So Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I'm pleased everyone liked that edition 46. Like that's always nice to hear. And yeah, it's lovely.
I still think about that. I want the artwork up on my wall one day, and I'm pretty sure most people can recite Shakespeare. I'm pretty sure I can recite the back of that bottle. I read it out so many times at that festival. It was great. People loved it. Well, we should probably move on to whiskey number 2. But yeah, I think that Jura really just brightened my evening. Mentally prepared me for the early night I have to have. But
Well,
yeah, so Glen Grant.
cool. Yeah, Glen Grant. I love Glen Grant. As anyone that's been in these tastings before knows, I'm a big fan of Glen Grant. I just like that it's a whiskey which has really a fundamental role to play historically in the popularization of malt whiskies, the growth of interest in malt whiskey, the culture of malt whiskey. It was a distillery which was, for many years, really like a lot of distilleries' second favorite whiskey would be Glen Grant. It was the original kind of Macallan in that respect, in that it was the one that everyone pointed to as Glen Grant is this kind of benchmark of quality. It was bottled as a single malt, really from the, you can find authentic examples with that same label that I've copied shamelessly for this bottling. You can find authentic examples of that Old Highland label going back probably as far back as the 1900s, I would imagine, like early 1900s, maybe late 19th century. But the fact is, it's been around as a malt in bottled form for well over a century. It's something that wasn't super expensive. It's getting much more expensive now, but the part of which is potentially my fault for keeping on wanging on about it in tasting notes and stuff. But the old bottles, it was a make you could find great old style whiskey, old bottles at a generally accessible price for a lot later than some other names. So that was always good. And the quality just has always been this amazing, broad, all-encompassing character as a whiskey that seemed to do really well at great age. So these Gordon MacPhail whiskies coming out now that, up to 70 years old, and these Glen Grants are still showing astonishingly well. And 5 years old. And that is an amazing distillate that can do that and show that versatility and have that power and adaptability. And then also just, I think, the character of it as a whiskey, the flavor profile, the fact that it's sort of this slightly fuller bodied Speyside, all these sorts of reasons why I love it. And then even these later examples that, this one is a 2003, and I think it's still a few notches above average for what you get out of Speyside in this day and age. I think it's still a bit fuller, it's still a bit fruitier. It's just always got a little bit more of an X factor about it as a distillate than lots of its other contemporary makes. So this is a 2003 first fill barrel of Glen Grant. Natural cask strength was about 59.5, and we brought it down to 57.1, so 100 proof, which is one of my favorite sort of all-round bottling strengths. Carries all the power of cask strength, but that little bit of dilution just helps to tease out extra fruitiness in the whiskey, and I think it shows better in bottle as a result, and will continue to show better in bottle, in decades to come. When I make selections for our bottling series, no matter what it is, I'm thinking about the immediate consumer now, but I also think, given my background is sort of old bottles and old and rare whiskies, I also like to try and think about someone opening one of these bottles 50 years from now, and what is that person going to think? What sort of experience are they going to have? And I think if you do a little bit of targeted reduction now at point of bottling, you'll end up with a much better product immediately, but also in the future as well. So that's a calculation that goes into it. So this is just very much a deliberate choice at this point in the series. I want to, we're approaching the end of Sponge. And I thought, right, I want to do one last Glen Grant, and I'm just going to really go to town on making it a very faithful, total rip-off of the heath-covered mountains from Scotia I Come, Glen Scotia classic label. Sorry, Glen Grant classic label, and just do it with a little Sponge twist. And so we even went as far as getting the oval cut out for this one, just to really drill into that old iconography. Thankfully, the label is so old that it's definitely not in copyright anywhere anymore, so I can pillage freely from that IP. So yeah, it's I think it's been a success. I think the good whiskey, price was right. I really love that combination of kind of like sweet fruits and subtle waxiness, a bit of wood spice. It's very creamy, very much on kind of like yellow and green fruits. Again, this is just one of these whiskies that I return to purely for pleasure. And, you know, I bottled this thinking this is like a very classic textbook Glen Grant, shareable, very pleasurable, very delicious. Divide US proof, which is divide. Yeah, different to US proof. That's correct.
Yeah.
Makes it
I
sold.
always get
Well, there were
mixed
only
up with the
169 bottles of this one, so yeah.
I always get mixed up with the UK proof and the American one. I'm like, wait, is this American? No, it's not. Okay, I need to do math now.
Yeah,
But
no, I just use online converters if I ever want to, because there's like little robots online that'll tell you the difference, but it's because it's basically like old Brexit fucking money. It's just, you know, it's the UK proof is the equivalent of trying to figure out guineas and pounds and shillings and sixpence and all that nonsense. So whereas yeah, America is just divide by two, much easier.
yeah,
So
one
yeah,
of the
is
few
everyone
mathematical
generally
things I got right.
how's everyone liking this Glen Grant then?
Yeah, what do we think? Please pop your tasting notes in, because I always get like a very biscuity sense from Glen Grant, and I'm an absolute always love the things I can't have. So I'm a sucker for Capadonic over Glen Grant. So I just love the appliness. But
We've got a really
yeah, Glen Grant
awesome
always
coming in Whiskiland later this year.
yay. Look at that, we're already getting the sneak previews.
Luscious. Tastes like a, I don't know, tastes like a 72 Capadonic.
Oh, I love it. Noel's loving it. Michael quite dry on the finish, beautiful nose. As Chris mentioned, it's very chewy on the palate. Yeah, Ollie loves the oval label. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, the oval label is just, it's that very iconic kind of whiskey label shape. I'm actually surprised a lot more brands don't go for that design. I know a lot of the Japanese independent
Yeah, Acorn in Japan used to do that. Yeah. I suppose it's just partly it's extra faff to pay for a cutter. It's also potentially faffy for the bottler to work with that different shape. We're just lucky that we had a printer that had an oval set ready to go, so there was no extra cost. And the bottler we work with were really, you know, very accommodating, and it was pretty straightforward. I definitely will probably revisit that in future. I mean, I'm with Whiskiland, I'm making everything very set, but with Decadent Drams, we can pretty much do whatever we want. So we'll probably at some point find another Glen Grant for Decadent Drams and do another very faithful rip-off of that label.
I love it. I imagine that probably a lot of brands used over labels in the older days because it kind of tricks your eye in case they put it off center slightly. It doesn't look as off center as perhaps a square one would.
And many of the old labels were off center because bottling was just a less rigorous process back then. Smells like there's still some bourbon influence in it. Yes, it's first fill bourbon barrel. So that's what's driving a lot of that nice, rich, sort of creamy lusciousness in this one. Although I do think there's, and again, going back to the first fill bourbon barrel, it's obviously also given it a bit of a spicy backbone. There's some spice in it as well, which is nice. I love distillate, but I do like when you get something where the distillate is clearly like good and has some inherent fruit character, the way that pairs with a good clean first fill bourbon barrel is just, it's hard to beat that sometimes in whiskey. Just really classical, really direct, luscious, juicy, tasty. Much better than the Jim Murray 15 best whiskey. I mean,
that's a low bar, Howard.
Possibly comment on Mr. Murray and his very malleable flavor preferences. Yeah, I don't know. That's another example where I think indies do the whiskey better, or do it better service than the distillery themselves. Modern Glen Grant bottlings are just kind of, they just feel a little bit like a missed opportunity to me. There's another distillery where, you know, if I could just be given the run of it, be a lot of changes made, but you'd probably say that about most distilleries, really. It's a shame. I
Yeah.
think that it's run by, you know, they look at the bottlings, they just look extremely boring. And you think, well, you know, you've got this amazing historic iconography, and you've got a distillery with so much, you know, critical importance to the history of malts. Why not like really lean into that and make a huge there's no point in me ranting about
It's
what Glen Grant
I
should
feel
or
like I have the same feeling about a lot of these distillery brands and whatnot, and they're trying to be edgy and cool, and it's very much that I can't remember the actor's name, but it's just like with the skateboard over his shoulder. It's like, what's up, cool, my fellow kids? You know, I think a lot of distilleries stray into that kind of vibe with marketing now. And I'm like, no, lean into the fact that you're old, you have heritage. Like, we like that stuff. Antiquing is still popular for a reason, you know, young people like old things too. So, but
yeah,
speaking of old things, how's that for the transition? Speaking of old
very
things,
smooth, very professional.
I know. Um, we should probably move on to whiskey number 3, the Glen Moray 32-year-old, the oldest whiskey on the
Yeah.
tasting tonight. And you did mention as well Decadent Drams. So tell us a little bit more about this new brand coming, Decadent Drams.
Yeah, so the whiskey, so first of all, this is Whisky Sponge 99. It's a multi-vintage combination of 2 different casks. So it's a 1990 refill hogshead and a 1991 second fill sherry hogshead of Glen Moray. What we did is we took the 1990 refill hoggy and tipped it in on top of the 91 second fill sherry hoggy, left that mix to stew in the sherry hoggy for a few months, then bottled it at cask strength. So that's what this bottling is. 32-year-old, half of it is about 33 years old, and it's I think just great old Glen Moray. I very deliberately chose this for edition 99 because edition 1 of Sponge was a old Glen Moray that was really lovely. And you know, Glen Moray as a whiskey is still, I think, a bit of an underrated gem of Speyside, and it's another one of these Speysiders that ages beautifully. And when you get a good one with good amount of age behind it from, you know, gentle cask types like refills, you just get this lovely, like extremely pleasurable, honeyed, rounded, fruity, opulent, you know, it's to me, a textbook example of what is best about older Speyside malts. And so that was the motivation. That was a motivation behind pairing these 2 casks together, was to create this very deliberate small batch kind of single profile bottling. So that's edition 99 of Sponge. And you know, as you know, Sponge concluded at edition 100. And from there, we moved on to 2 new brands, a flagship brand, which is Whiskiland, which is for our sort of more expensive, really top, most, you know, luscious, amazing whiskies we can find. And then sitting beneath that is what I call our kind of all-encompassing brand, which is Decadent Drams. With Sponge, we did spirits under different sort of series of Sponge. We did rum sponge, cognac sponge, Armagnac sponge. So these new brands are introduced partly for the reason that I don't want us as a company that's very much about creativity to get stuck in a rut with our creativity, to be doing the same thing, be a one-trick pony, do that in perpetuity, for it to get stale, boring, for me to get bored, or for you as our audience and consumers to get bored. I thought, it's 5 years since we started. We're coming up to edition 100. It is the perfect time to refresh, to change, to take a new direction, and to demonstrate that we can still be original and creative and still put out bottlings that embody the same principles, you know, fun, humor, not taking everything too seriously, original artworks, but do it differently, put a different spin on it, have different brands, a different focus. So that's really the prime motivation behind that. There's also a practical motivation, which is that the nature of our supply is sort of ever evolving, and the nature of the market is ever evolving. And I thought that going forward, it really makes things a bit neater and a bit more sensible to have a brand for the really top whiskies, the ones that are more expensive and harder to find, and that's Whiskiland. But I think it makes more sense, as we're doing fewer rums, arguably fewer French spirits, more whiskies, we're still going to do all these different spirits, but I thought maybe it makes more sense to have everything else under one unified series. Decadent Drams focuses all the attention on Decadent Drinks, the company, and gives us a totally fresh palette in which to be creative with our branding, our labeling, to make the original artworks that we do really front and center, so that every bottling becomes kind of a completely original label in its own right. And it gives us a chance to be really playful in that space, I think. So that is Decadent Drams. Decadent Drams is our bread and butter bottling series. It's the one where we'll put out the most products. It's the one that's going to be a home for all spirits, all different drinks that we can find. So whether that's a rum, whether it's a Calvados, whether it's a fortified wine, this series will be the home for that. And we're going to have maximum adaptability. So we might have an oval label Glen Grant ripoff for one bottling. We might have a totally original artwork that does a totally fresh take on the Decadent Dram branding with the next bottling. The idea is that each bottling is inspired by the liquid or some of the jokes that sit around that distillery or some of the history of that particular whiskey. We want to be able to take inspiration from as many different places as possible and use that to present Decadent Drams as a kind of unique proposition from bottling to bottling. So that will be Decadent Drams. It's probably going to be products for whiskey anyway, up to around about the kind of £350 price point, and above that, we'd probably put those products in Whiskiland instead. And yeah, so that's Decadent Drams. And the first bottling is just out or just about to come out. It's a Glen Moray 2000, Glengarry 2003. So
Is he frozen this time?
That for the first Decadent Drams is like a really good sort of benchmark example of where we're pitching.
It's not just me. He's frozen for, is it?
Yeah, we lost Angus.
Okay, we lost you for a
well?
bit, just telling us all about the Glengarry, which I wasn't sure if I could talk about because I think I saw some photos and I was very excited. I love
Glengarry is the first bottling, yeah, 2003, 21-year-old first fill hoggy of Glengarry. That's the first Decadent Drams, and that was picked that just because it's a really good sort of textbook example of the kind of quality and where we're pitching Decadent Drams generally. The next bottling is going to be a 2001 blended malt, a 23-year-old, quite dark sherry old style blended malt, which has spent about a year in the ex-Ardbeg butt that we used, that matured Islay Sponge 3, our Kildalton bottling. So that's coming out very soon as well, next month. So those are the first two Decadent Drams releases. And then later on, we've got a cognac coming soon as well for Decadent Drams. So very quickly, this brand will emerge and you'll start to see the approach we're taking and the sort of variety of different liquids that are going to populate that brand. Whereas Whiskiland is much more singular and focused around, older, higher quality Scotch whiskies. And that'll be very, very set in terms of its presentation, its bottle, its label design, its template, all this stuff. The concept behind that is, I think, quite rigid, quite structured, whereas Decadent Drams is very free, very open, very sort of freestyle. So it looks like most people are enjoying.
Yeah. Look, I'm a sucker for Glen Moray. I'm the same. I think it's particularly underrated here in Australia because it's so crazy cheap to buy Glen Moray at like the big chain bottle shops. And so people are like, oh, it's the cheapest Scotch whiskey. It must be terrible. And it's like, no, they did some deal. I don't know. But yeah, so it gets a little bit of a bad rap in Australia and they're trying to fix that at the moment. But I've always loved the brand, and independent bottlings of it just really showcase. I think this one's probably on par with a 30-year-old, I think, single cask Glen Moray I had from the Society. But yeah, it's so good. Honeycomb, wax, sandalwood. I got Werther's caramels. Michael classic banana lolly on the end of the palate. Chris says it smells like eggnog and he loves eggnog. That's disgusting. It's gross. At least like enjoy something nice like horchata. I mean, come on. But yeah, no, it's definitely got that, like Jared said as well, great point. Fruit, warm honey, and toffee. It is all of those things that are just so lovely, and it's got so much body to it as well. It's not like it's fresh, but
Yeah.
also not, thin.
I think what I like about it is it combines the great character of a sort of classic refill matured older Glen Moray, but the sherry cask, even though it's a second fill, but it had 32 years in that second fill sherry cask, there's a reasonable amount of sherry influence, but it's just a very light touch sherry influence. So the net effect is that it's just a very rich, like you say, full-bodied, warming, rounded, quite singular. I like that. I like this idea I keep coming back to of whiskies which have a single cohesive profile. They don't feel jointed or lopsided or inconsistent or incoherent. So yeah, I really love this one. I was really happy with how it turned out. I think letting them marry together for a few months really did the trick and just got this beautiful best of both worlds effect. The reason I like these small batch compositions is that I think that when you do that, if you do it right, you get the best of both casks in a way that creates a whiskey which is greater than the sum of its parts individually. I'm very certain that if we'd done either of these as single casks separately on their own, you wouldn't have a whiskey as good as this one. You'd have two whiskies, both very good and both quite different, but there wouldn't be either of them at the same sort of level that this one is at, I don't think.
And also, I think Polly wanted to bring up the fabulous, not quite Disney label.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there is a sort of Star Trek-y vibe, but what I really was trying to do was not Star Trek. It was just the pitch I discussed with my artist was I need this to be like an iconic old sci-fi film poster and essentially just pull in as many references from previous sponge labels as we can possibly fit on. And so that was the idea. It was like, this is the penultimate installment, and here's all these references to everything that's come before. So yeah, that was very much the idea behind it. And then down at the bottom, all that text there, that's essentially like the credits at the bottom of a film poster. That's just all my colleagues named for their various activities in the company. So it's just sort of fairly typical sponge pop culture and self-referential nonsense. And the rear label on this one riffs on that further as well. So that was the concept behind this. Is I thought, like, let's have a penultimate bottling which really just celebrates all that's gone before, draws it all together, and then for edition 100, as we'll see later on, is really more about looking forward and kind of just drawing a neat, sort of elegant line under things.
Yeah, so cool. It's I love it. I can't quite get over the Commander and Cheeto at the front looking Trump looking guy, but
that was from our very first cognac bottling. That was because we did a 1945 cognac, and I wanted to do a like 2020 versus 1945 in terms of it was actually like really deliberately an attempt at like political satire, and I thought it was pretty good. We got a lot of good feedback for it, but yeah, that was one where it got quite a few raised eyebrows and comments because it was genuinely a bit sort of edgy. But anyway, so that I very deliberately wanted to include a reference back to that in that one. Right, what's next?
Yes, I was about to say, I'm like conscious that of time and whatnot. Yeah, so this is the second installment in that island artwork series. Was it just the two island, the two Jura and Isla, or did you do other artworks of the other? And that might
this is
eventually?
No, we just did these two, did the Jura and the Bruichladdich under this series because I thought we could go on with all these maps, and retrospectively, we could have taken that map vibe for Whisky Sponge. Although I really love what we did with Whisky Sponge in terms of its design and presentation and the sort of branding on that mini series. So I no regrets. But and we might choose to revisit this artwork style in the future for something else if it makes sense to do so. But for this one, it was really just these two. partly driven by the fact that the concept originally was just to do Islay and Jura side by side and really focus on celebrating them. And it made sense at this point that we had these gaps we needed to do a 97 and a 96 sponge, and thought, right, the timing is just aligned perfectly. This will do. So yeah, the Bruichladdich is the sort of yin to the Jura yang. And so this is a first fill barrel of Bruichladdich 2005, matured again pretty much its entire life on Islay at the distillery. A privately owned cask that we bought, I think, I can't remember where we bought this, maybe it was at auction or something like that. And then, yeah, so 19 years old, fully matured first fill bourbon barrel, natural cask strength, same principles as the Jura in that respect, in that it was just one cask type, cask strength, single cask, no messing about. And again, I think this is a really good example of modern, sort of fairly classic Bruichladdich in a very good way. But it's quite an extreme whiskey. Like it's really, the thing that it brings to my mind is like unpeated Brora in some respects, that has this farminess. It's got this like quite big, intense character that takes in the shoreline and minerality and coastal impressions, but also farmyard and mechanical aspects. And that's something I think it shares a little bit with the Jura, is this sense of like a sort of dirty working distillery, and toolbox rags and oiliness and mechanical impressions. And I think what it also has as well is this almost like yogurty lactic acid characteristic, which I find in a lot of these Bruichladdich, and sounds horrible, but it's actually, I think, quite nice, enjoyable. And also a waxiness, again, a textural whiskey, an oily whiskey, a fat whiskey that has, character in terms of flavor and aroma, but also has this presence in the mouth. So again, I really like this. I thought it paired very well. Bit of cheese on, yeah, so there you go, cheese. Funk, yes, all these things, agreed. And this is perhaps a good example of why these two whiskies tend to split people down the middle a bit. But again, that's the sort of thing that I want as a bottler. I like whiskies which have quite assertive personalities, and those personalities to be driven as much, or if not more, by the distillate than just by the wood. And so that's something I think we achieved well here with this pair. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see what everyone thinks about this, because I really like this one, but I also understand why some people might find it a bit extreme or a bit intense. I don't know. But to me, it's just an example that Bruichladdich made very good, very charismatic distillate in those sort of early post takeover years.
Yeah, they're very much sisters, but like one sister decided to pursue a non-traditional career. It's it's very like, I feel like
that analogy.
Yeah, this one has a little bit more of that funk, that almost dunnage kind of, like that sharp smell you get from a horse stables, but not in a bad way. And like a little bit of like lemon Greek yogurt. But yeah, like you said, Gary, it's getting a bit of cheese on the nose. Only quite the warming finish for a 19-year-old. Chris opens up with some nice butterscotchy sweetness. Yeah, it almost reminds me more of erring towards the Port Charlotte style, because I do get a lot of those cheesy floral funks from Port Charlotte styles of distillate rather than Bruichladdich. I get more grassy from Bruichladdich typically, but I love this. It's very pretty.
Yeah, well, the 2003 Port Charlotte that was the one that was quite popular with your bars out there. So this essentially reminds me of like that minus the peat. Now, if you take the peat out of that Port Charlotte, I think you would get something not dissimilar to this 05 Bruichladdich. And so there's quite a lot of synergy, and that's probably why I liked it, because I loved that Port Charlotte bottling. And I think this characteristic really lends itself to peat, which is why I think these Port Charlottes from similar vintages, similar period of production work so well, because that kind of funkiness just gets absorbed into the peat and does something to the peat that makes it work so well. In a way that you miss in Octomore, because the peat is so dominant that it kind of deletes those other characteristics. That's why I think Port Charlotte is my kind of favorite, alongside classic Laddie. Port Charlotte is my favorite of the sort of alternate makes that they do. But absolutely, I think if you sucked the peat out of that Port Charlotte, I think you get something very similar to this Bruichladdich.
Yeah. I think Howard's wondering if this was originally peated. I assume it was the same 5 ppm or like very, very light unpeated.
So very early on in 2001, when they restarted, they did Bruichladdich at 10 ppm. But after that, they stopped, and they were really doing Bruichladdich pretty much unpeated, as far as I understand it. And the peat got diverted into doing Port Charlotte, and later on Lochendal and Octomore as well. I don't believe there's any peat in this, unless there are residual phenolics sloshing around in the distillery system because they're doing different makes. And then you can get, you can get some sort of peat incepted into Bruichladdich spirit that way. And you never know with these distilleries. There's always a possibility things like that go on. This was made in May, I think, to recall. May distillation. So maybe also
Summertime.
warm, summery elements could bring out some kind of funkiness via fermentation. Who knows?
Yeah, interesting. Well, we might move on to the next whiskey, but before we do, if you've got the whiskey in your glass or pour it into your glass, Ollie is doing a screen record. We're trying to put together a little intro video so that I don't have to do the housekeeping every every single time. So we're doing a screen record. So if you could hold up your glasses and cheers. Yeah, that's all good.
Well, cheers to edition 100, more importantly.
Yeah, exactly. A perfect
Cheers.
whiskey to cheers on. But yeah.
So Sponge edition 100. So it's an Ardnamurchan, and it's a 7-year-old. And this whiskey is a composition of 8 different sherry octaves. It's an equal mix of peated and unpeated spirit, first fill and second fill octaves, and an equal mix also of 2016 and 2017 distillation. So it's a mishmash of a load of different forces of influence. Those 8 octaves were dumped together into a refill sherry butt and left for about 6 months to marry. And then we bottled it with around 2.5 degrees reduction, again down to 57.1%, 100 proof. Now, there's a load of reasons I chose this for edition 100. With edition 100, I was very conscious about sort of messaging, and I didn't want this to be a super expensive unobtainium bottling. People would just say, oh, how can I afford that? The Glen Moray took care of that. This, I wanted it to be something where we had a lot of bottles, so 535 out turn, I think, and we could retail it for 95 quid a bottle, which is in this day and age okay, I think. And it's certainly at a price where enough people could feel they could access it and participate in what was a celebratory bottling. I also wanted it to be, these are really important aspects of it now, which is that I wanted it to be a collaborative bottling. So it's one where we worked as an indie bottler directly with a distillery. There's no middleman. It's a direct, creative, mutually beneficial project, beneficial to them, beneficial to us, and creates a fun, different take on Ardnamurchan that's very decadent drinks. Our creativity all over it, our decision making is all over it. This absolutely wouldn't exist without quite a number of sort of interventionist, very deliberate decisions that we took. And I think that shows both companies well in positive light and creates for drinkers and consumers alike unique whiskey that would not otherwise exist without both those companies working together positively and creatively. And I think also it's a forward-looking whiskey. It's not an old whiskey. It's not from a closed distillery. It's not something which people are perhaps used to. It's a modern, newish, fun, zeitgeisty distillery that is, doing great work in making really good Highland malt whiskey, West Highland malt whiskey for, the modern new era of whiskey that we're in. And that's why I wanted to pick that. I wanted that very much to be front and center. It's like, this is the end of Sponge, but we're forward looking. We're going out into the future. We've got lots still to do, lots of fun still to be had, lots of whiskey still to bottle. And this is really just the start of that new era. And it's drawing a close to one chapter, but opening a new one. And so those were all the really core reasons why I wanted to do it. It was important to me that Whisky Sponge Edition 100 was a great whiskey in and of itself, but also just contained a lot of like important messaging in the selection and in what we did, how we did it. And then to the whiskey itself, I think it worked out really well. I think it's a very good, young, characterful whiskey. It's a modern whiskey, very much so. Like, this is a whiskey where the wood has quite a lot of influence in terms of what it's done to the spirit. But I think we've just about managed to put something together where you get a balance between the influence of the wood and you still get the Ardnamurchan spirit character there. The use of peated and unpeated brings enough peat, but not too much. The way that integrated with the influence of the sherry and those small concentrated sherry octaves where you get wood and sherry together. It's a concentrated whiskey, and the fact that it's then all been allowed to marry with quite a lot of headspace in a refill butt, so it's gone from active wood to very inactive wood, and it's just been left to kind of aerate a bit, marry a bit, and then been slightly reduced. All these little activities that were undertaken and performed upon that spirit has helped to create a final, again, I come back to this word, cohesive, single, I think good quality, very good quality young whiskey. And I think, to me, this is everything I like about younger malt whiskies. It's big, it's characterful. I think it's got that lovely fusion of sherry and peat, which I love so much. It's West Highland, which is, personal to me. I'm from the West Coast, and that's where like my family's from. It's my heritage. And so all these reasons and all these things wrapped up in this whiskey. It's really personally significant bottling for me, and I'm really pleased with how it's come out. I hope you all enjoy the whiskey for what it is, which I think is just a good, gutsy, charismatic, modern, in the best sense, Highland malt whiskey.
Yeah, I was so excited to try this one. I love sherried Ardnamurchan, and this has that kind of black pepper tone to it that I find can it's either like a black pepper or white pepper tone that I find in Ardnamurchan whiskies, which I love. It gives them this savory quality, which is so different and so unusual from other savory style whiskies. So cool. I do remember seeing, I think on one of the Facebook groups or a thread or something like that, and someone was just like, this is ridiculous. Why didn't he bottle a really expensive, really old whiskey as number 100? Why is it 7 years old? This is crazy. And I was like, this is exactly what Sponge is about. Like, you don't get it. If you want for something old and ridiculous, you came to the wrong place. Like, you got it with the 99. Sit down and have a delicious 100.
The one thing I've learned in doing whiskey over the last 20 years or so is that you absolutely cannot please everyone, and therefore you should not try. just get on and do the best you can do and be true to yourself if you can, and hope for the best. That's why I try and pay as little attention as possible to social media this day and age.
Let me trying to remember. Last time we had Alex Bruce and Connell on from Adelphi Ardnamurchan, and they were talking about you had just visited the distillery. They'd just bottled their Ardnamurchan. Was it that weekend when you picked this cask?
So the Ardnamurchan visit was one before. That was a few years ago now. This is when did I visit last year? I can't remember. It was like summer last year or something like that. It's over a year ago now, and that was the one where I picked out all these wee octaves and put together the plan for this. So yeah, I need to go back up. This is reminding me, I need to chase Connell because I've been at him for a while to get a date together to go back and do another project. So yeah, that's good.
Well,
good
see
reminder.
if they'll let you in on a Sunday so that I can come with, because I'm currently trying to get in when the distillery is closed, and I'm like, don't worry about it, it's fine, I'll come another time. But yeah, let's make it a trip.
Warehouse trips are better done when the distillery's closed anyway.
Perfect.
Just get the keys and wander about and plunder. No, it's great. Going to Ardnamurchan's a wonderful experience. I love it. It's a nice journey up there. It's a mission to get there, so you feel like you've earned a dram when you arrive, and it's also it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous part of the Highlands, which is, you're really properly in the Highlands there. You're out the way, away from, the big cities and towns, and it's an incredible, pretty unspoiled landscape and a truly ancient landscape, and it's an amazing place to if you're like me, an old hippie who just likes to go and throw himself in large bodies of natural water and swim about, then it's great for that as well.
Yeah, it looks really beautiful. I can't wait to go. Yeah, Michael says one of the bucket list distilleries to visit. Ollie, this is great. Michael, beautiful nose, tasty palate, again, chewy, bit of a bite on the long finish. He's glad he got a bottle, great texture. Yeah, this is just tasty stuff. It's
Yeah,
dropping
cool.
things
I'm glad everyone
apparently,
seems to enjoy it. So yeah, and then the pivot is from Whisky Sponge to Whiskyland. So I came up. So one of the other reasons for doing this stopping Sponge is that I care a lot about Sponge. It's been something that I created initially just for fun as a blog, to play around with a different type of writing and to sort of have a little like alter ego to enable different writing tone of voice and style. And then that just evolved organically into eventually a bottling series, which was not planned. We never planned to do decadent drinks, never planned to be an independent bottler. Just kind of one thing led to another, and it happened, and it evolved and grew into a company. And that's all been, you know, an extreme learning experience. So over the last 5 years, we've learned a lot doing what we've done. And there's a number of things we may not have done the same way had we sort of known then what we know now. So one of the other things about this changeover is, I think by stopping Sponge at the point where we did, it helps to protect what it is. I think it's always better to leave people wanting more. I think it's better to not let things you care about go stale or become boring. If I lose interest or energy, that'll show very quickly in what we're putting out or how we're presenting things or the artworks themselves. So I thought, let's just not, you know, push this forever. This is a nice point at which to stop. So let's stop while it's still good and strong, I think. And it made me think about what I wanted to do next. And I thought, well, if we go for something again after this, let's really define it and limit it and make it just 100 bottlings. And let's really pour all our like creative energy into making it strong and distinctive and, you know, with a lot of like clear themes. And that's where Whiskyland emerged. I thought, what was good about Sponge? It was a character. So there was a character called Whisky Sponge, and that drove a lot of the brand presentational elements and the artworks and the ideas behind it. But I thought, what could be a bit more creatively freeing is if the world becomes the character. So I came up with this idea of Whiskyland, which is essentially our culture, our whiskey world, our shared, you know, passion and world culture, but just reflected back at us through this kind of surreal, satirical lens. It's kind of like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but for whiskey in that respect. And so I thought, we can do this. The world can become the character, which opens up a load of more, a load of different artistic approaches and creative avenues that we can explore and go down. And we can still be satirical. We can still put humor at front and center at the heart of it, but we can also be a bit more, perhaps a bit more traditionalistic with some of our artworks and really embrace things like beauty and pathos on occasion and really mix it up. And I thought in my head that that really had a sort of strong sense of a series. You know, we could fix it with themes of travel that underpin it in old encyclopedias. You know, again, this idea of a guide, of postcards, all these sort of little touches that I thought really worked with this concept of the world, Whiskyland, exploring that world, reporting back from that world, a guide into that world, and then a chance to do, you know, fairly typical decadent drink stuff of like surrealism and satire and humor. So that was where Whiskyland came from, and we developed that over about a year or so of just playing around with artworks and the label template and finding a bottle that I'm very clear I wanted this to be distinct and have its own bottle, so we sourced that. And so that's what has become Whiskyland, which is now we're on chapter 3. What we're about to taste here is chapter 1, which is 1998 first fill sherry butt of Springbank. So this is from the same private owner that owned the 1999 we bottled earlier this year as WhiskySponge 3. And I deliberately held onto this cask for Whiskyland chapter 1. Obviously, I wanted to start the series with a bang, with an impressive whiskey. And this is kind of like about as impressive as you can get in this day and age as an indie bottler, as a 26-year-old full-term matured first fill sherry out of Springbank. And also because I thought it was extremely good whiskey. I thought this is even better than the 99. I thought it was, to me, everything I love about sherry cask Springbank, in that it still has a load of Springbank distillate character in there, but the sherry is beautiful and creamy and like animalistic and leathery and earthy and deep and unctuous, but you've still got this lovely peppery Springbank peat. It's coastal, it's waxy, that it's very old style in my view. And it's a sort of whiskey which is just rare as hen's teeth to be able to find a cask of nowadays. So I thought it was an obvious choice for Whiskyland Chapter 1. I thought it set the tone and the benchmark for the series very well. And I thought this, alongside Chapter 2, which is the Bowmore 2004 we just did, and that sold out very well and also a great whiskey. But those two showed the perfect kind of two ends of the Whiskyland spectrum. The initial entry price point for Whiskyland, and then the sort of higher end price point where we'll probably be pitching a few more examples over the coming months and years. And so I hope you like the whiskey. I've got a sneaking suspicion you will like this whiskey because I think it's very good. And I hope you like Whiskyland as a brand, as a concept, as a vehicle for the very best casks of whiskey that we can find going ahead into the next few years. So I reckon, by my calculation, it'll take us about 4 to 4.5 years to do Whiskyland as a complete set of 100 chapters. There won't be any A's and B's. There won't be any, like offshoots or side series like we've done with Sponge. Whiskyland is designed to be extremely focused around just 100 perfect chapters. That's the theory, and that's the ambition. So hopefully, about 4.5 years from now, we'll be able to look at a wall of 10 by 10 Whiskyland chapters, and that'll be the book of Whiskyland complete. So we've already got up to 11 or 12 chapters identified. So hopefully we can find the remaining 88.
Doing better than George R. R. Martin. You Stephen Kinging this book. That is spectacular. I will say in my defense, I still haven't tried the previous Springbank, but I think this is one of the best Springbanks I've had in a very long time. It's got this like wonderful sweetness to it as well that, like, I don't know how familiar everyone in the chat is with Sovereign Hill down in Victoria, but they do these horsehead lollipops, which are like the hard rock candy, well, not rock candy, but like hard candy raspberry kind of lollies, and it tastes like, when you get to the bottom of it and you're like licking the stick as well, it's got that like kind of bit of grit's not the right word, but like bit of texture to it through the sweetness, and it's so cool. Absolutely spectacular. Michael says it's got to be the standout. Chris and Ollie are making inside jokes in the chat. Jared, dark fruits, leather, tobacco, and struck matches. Struck matches is a great one, that kind of like phosphorus sort of thing, but so incredible. And I mean, what a 1-2 punch of a fabulous Ardnamurchan to this like introduction to the new series. I literally can't wait. I love the artwork for them already, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy but for whiskey is probably one of the most exciting concepts I've heard in a long time. So super thrilled.
Well, I'm glad you like it. I mean, I knew that if we'd stopped Sponge, we had to do something strong that would follow it. But then fundamentally, I'm not a blender, and I think my role in our company is as a sort of creative person. And if we've created a company where we explicitly put creativity at the kind of heart of what we do, and one of our like positive attributes as a company, then we need to live by that, and we need to set ourselves these challenges, and we need to make the effort. And also, just because of the nature of the market we're in, indie bottling whiskey full stop is a very busy, highly competitive marketplace, and you have to do stuff that stands out, set yourselves apart, go the extra mile, make an effort to be as strong and as good as and as individual and as distinctive as you can. So that's what this, and similarly what Decadent Drams is about. And these two series are really meant to sit in, you know, mutually benefiting contrast. Decadent Drams is much more scrappy and playful and varied, and will draw inspiration from absolutely everywhere, and will be, you know, really fun, I hope. And you know, we're not going to have a set brand for Decadent Drams. We've been using one from the sort of first bottling into some of our marketing materials, but what I hope is that Decadent Drinks artworks have come to have a strength of identity in and of themselves that don't necessarily need a single continual brand that identifies them. So the plan with Decadent Drams is just to vary the branding and the presentation entirely, so that each label is a really unique single individual artwork. Whereas with Whiskiland, the branding is much more set and kind of stronger and more rigid. So there's a nice sort of contrast between the two key series that we're doing. And then alongside that, we'll maintain Equinox and Solstice, because that's a little bit like my baby. I love that series, and I think that we need something which is just these occasional everyday drinker bottlings, and the concept behind that I think is nice. It works. I want to keep doing that. And then we've got Old Orkney. So this will just be occasionally, when we find Orkney whiskies we really like, we will do an Old Orkney bottling. And so here's chapter 3, Glen Grant 93, Whiskiland. And beyond that, coming up, we've got Benriach 91, Kalila 92, Bamor 85, and what else? Tomatin 94, Capadonic 94. Mm. So these are some of the Whiskilands that are coming up over the next few months.
I'm just going to highlight how playful you're being with the new series here. So Barrel Bug.
Yeah, so this was when we used to do Sponge. We did a word from the sponge with each, you know, all our social posts would have, you know, as part of the run up to a new bottling, we'd have a word from the sponge, a quote from the sponge. So with Decadent Drams, we're doing we're doing a quote from me, which is just me being kind of typically sardonic and nonsensy. And then with Whiskiland, we've got a word from the Whiskiland Tourist Board. So we're trying to, you know, it's this thing of like doing something different, but not so different that it's jarring. And it's been able to show that we can do something that is sufficiently different, but still maintains and holds a lot of the qualities and values that I hope people enjoyed about Sponge previously. It's just trying to strike that balance. And so there's definitely going to be no shortage of silliness and nonsense and fun from both series going forward. But yeah, I think the Springbank was the right way to start the series, and it gave the right kind of messaging and as a jumping off point. And I think it was cool to do that alongside, you know, to go quite a gear shift to go from a young Ardnamurchan to an old Springbank. Quite cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I kind of like that almost parallel of people talk about their whiskey journey, and then Whiskiland is literally like going on a journey, going on a vacation. Here's the tourist tips, avoid this or make sure you see that. I think it's going to be very, very exciting. Well, I might pop it in the chat because Ollie has informed me that we have 20% off all Decadent drinks tonight. So all those bottles are in the little link in the chat. So I think there's limited quantities of some of them. I know that the Ardnamurchan went a little bit bonkers to the point where I was like, oh crap, I should probably get one for myself.
We held some stock back purely for tonight, so the code is Sponge for checkout. We figured why not celebrate the end of the series and the start of a new with a sale as well, to mark the occasion. But we appreciate everyone's support. A lot of you have been to so many of these tastings. Welcome to those who are joining us for the first time, but it's been so good. Emma, I forgot to run the poll. We need to,
I was about to say, I was like, did you put together a poll? I think we were so excited before the tasting talking about like secret whiskey things. I was like, did he even put one together? But yes, we've got the poll as per usual. You can vote for your top 2 whiskies of the night, and we can see how the voting goes. But and we'll do a drum roll at the end. But yeah, I don't think that there was I think they all really stand out in their own ways. It's like, yeah, just really ramping up, and high expectations for all the Whiskiland. I think you've settled yourself in for, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just if we can sustain it to 100 chapters, I sort of think we can. I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't vaguely confident that we could pull it off, but we'll see. I mean, what I'd love to do, I just had this idea while I was out for a walk yesterday, is that we'll hold on to a full set internally, and then I'll arrange some kind of like festival of tastings over 5 days, and we'll taste all 100 whiskey lands. I mean, there's probably a lot of like operational complexity in making that happen, but that's the dream.
What you should do? You should find one of the biggest local book fairs or book festivals in Scotland and do like a reading, and you'll have a bajillion whiskey lovers, obviously storming this book fair, but you could lean into the literariness, and then that way you don't have a bajillion whiskeys alongside other bajillions of whiskeys at a show or a festival or something. Could be fun.
Well, there's all sorts of plans to do something extravagant for Decadent Drinks' 10th anniversary in 5 years' time, and between now and then, I also need to think about what we do after Whiskiland. So that's still sort of ongoing in the back of my brain.
That's a thought
for
stops. 2 years down the line.
Yeah.
100-day advent calendar by Howard. I think that's the moneymaker there.
That could be fun, actually.
Possibly, yeah.
just one entire third of the year, just every day.
And it's just like you can either try it every day or save it for Christmas and load up all at once to avoid your relatives. But yeah.
Yeah, well, we might be able to do, if we can get 365 different Decadent Drinks bottlings within a few years, then we should be able to do a year-long advent calendar. I'm not doing the sample filling though for that, because fuck that.
Outsource that.
First year of COVID, we did all the virtual shows. We did 42,000 sample bottles over 12 months. But we had a lot of helpers, a lot of public services, a lot of businesses stopped working. So we had a whole contingent of people who are employed and filling, but it was painful.
Yeah, and now everyone's got like repetitive wrist strain injury for life from fiddly little sample. Oh, I hate doing it. Such pain.
I think I've still got I was at Whiskey Now, and it's still when COVID hit, and we were doing like small little sample packs for sale, and I think I still have the callus on my finger from like twisting I did thousands of those sample packs on my own, like, and sometimes I would have like another person help me, but yeah, ooh, that's a bit of PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely.
None of us want anymore.
1,000-yard stare, sample stare.
Yeah, exactly.
Angus, sorry, one more piece of feedback. So I've tried all three Springbanks, the recent ones back to back. This one's the most spirit forward. The other two are quite heavily sherried. So this is my favorite out of the three.
Mine too. And it was lucky it happened that way, that we were working on the 99 and the 98 at the same time. The 96 was sort of separate year before. And then I got to try 98, 99 together. And so that's why I decided that order. So I wanted to save my favorite for Whiskiland Chapter 1. I love the 99 as well, but I think this has just got, like you say, just that bit more, it's a bit fruitier as well, I think, which just, that bit more Springbank raw DNA in there. Cool.
Yeah.
And I can see the poll results.
I know. Ollie, I think everyone agrees with Ollie. It was one of the best Springbanks. Ollie, we need to figure out how to insert drumroll sounds. Need to make it more high-tech. But yeah, the Springbank and the Glen Moray, the absolute two standouts. It's good to see a little bit of love across the others, but no,
it's as I kind of would have expected, and it's also it's good. It's a nice spread of preference. So happy with that.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think that is it. Concludes the. I'm sure we'll probably have Sponge in future tastings at some point or whatever, but I think officially the final Sponge tasting of the year of the ever for the whiskey list, and yeah, really excited to see and taste. I'm so keen on that Glengarry. But yeah, I think we're all very excited for the new chapters and the new brands from Whiskiland and Decadent Drams and all that. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I know it was a little bit later and we went a bit over time, as we always do, because Angus has the best stories. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining. We will catch you at the next virtual tasting. Take care.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.